Ethan's hand hovered over the keyboard, the glow of the computer monitor illuminating his furrowed brow in the otherwise dim room. The cursor blinked steadily, awaiting the command that would delve deeper into Amanda's meticulously crafted digital life. Over a decade of marriage had taught him to notice the subtle shifts in her demeanor. The way her laughter came less frequently, her phone clutched more protectively, the hurry excuses for late meetings that once didn't seem so urgent. It wasn't just suspicion anymore, it was certainty. Something was deeply wrong. Something was deeply wrong. Ethan worked methodically, his IT expertise allowing him to piece together a timeline from Amanda's devices. He wasn't proud of this invasion of privacy, but in his mind it wasn't unjustified. Her employer's name, Richard, appeared too often for mere coincidence in her calendar entries, late-night calls, and credit card statements. Dinner at a five-star restaurant for client relations didn't match the expense reports Amanda had once shown him proudly. It only reached the highest levels within the restaurant for a month. He imagined a repertoire for the payments of the wedding pay. He dropped the bed against a double wall. He searched further, scrolling through archived emails, flagged messages, and hidden folders. And there it was. An email thread buried under innocuous subject lines like budget proposal and quarterly strategy contained more than business jargon. The language between Amanda and Richard was playful, intimate, and revealing. Ethan's stomach churned as he read through their plans for a weekend getaway at a luxury resort. Amanda's cheerful tone, a sharp contrast to the growing distance she had shown him at home. Betrayal wasn't new to Ethan. As a child, he had seen his father's infidelity rip his family apart, leaving scars that healed but never truly disappeared. The memories of his mother's muffled sobs at night fueled the anger building inside him now. He had vowed never to let anyone exploit his trust, to be the vigilant protector his mother hadn't had. But Ethan wasn't impulsive. Acting out of anger was a trap, and he was smarter than that. He called Greg, his oldest friend and a cybersecurity expert, and shared his findings. "I need hard evidence," Ethan said. His voice steadied despite the storm raging within. "Not just for me, but for the fallout that's coming." Greg hesitated before responding. "I'm sure," Ethan replied, his gray eyes cold. "I'm not just exposing them. I'm ending this." Over the next few days, Ethan worked covertly, ensuring Amanda wouldn't suspect his growing arsenal of evidence. Greg helped him plant discreet surveillance software, capturing screenshots, recording calls, and logging keystrokes. Every night, Ethan returned to their shared bed, lying beside the woman who still kissed him goodnight without a trace of guilt in her eyes. "Braggs, need a piece of paper?" "I'm going to need to draw this up here," Greg said. "I'm going to need to cut a piece of paper out of this book and put it on here." The hardest part was not confronting her immediately. He rehearsed countless conversations in his head, imagining the look on her face when she realized the depth of his knowledge. But Ethan didn't want an emotional outburst. He wanted a reckoning, one that would leave no room for denial, no path to escape. He wasn't merely a man scorned. He was a man preparing to dismantle the facade his wife had built, brick by deceitful brick. Ethan's days became a delicate balancing act between maintaining the facade of normalcy and delving deeper into Amanda's deception. As the evidence accumulated, so did the weight of the betrayal. Each discovery chipped away at his restraint. But Ethan knew he had to stay composed. Confrontation without strategy would only give Amanda and Richard the chance to spin a narrative. He wasn't going to allow that. The tipping point came one evening when Amanda returned home late. She had texted earlier about a supposed client meeting running over, her tone breezy and apologetic. As she walked through the door, her polished appearance and faint scent of perfume struck Ethan like a punch. She looked too radiant for someone coming from a stressful business dinner. "Long day?" Ethan asked casually, not letting his gaze linger. Amanda had hesitated briefly before placing her bag down. "Exhausting. Richard keeps piling on last-minute work. I'm starting to think he lives to test my limits." Her laugh was light practice, but Ethan caught the flicker of guilt that crossed her face. Later that night, when Amanda showered, Ethan retrieved her phone from her bag. It wasn't the first time he'd done this. Her passcode hadn't changed, another sign she didn't think she needed to cover her tracks. This time he found a set of text messages she hadn't bothered to delete. Where Richard? Tomorrow night, usual place. I'll handle the reservations. Amanda, looking forward to it? The casual intimacy in the exchange boiled Ethan's blood, but his anger cooled almost instantly as a sharper, more tactical thought took over. He needed a precise, calculated strike, not one born out of rage. His strategy had to destroy them both, leaving no room for excuses or redemption. The following day, Ethan met Greg at a quiet cafe far from his usual haunts. Greg, ever pragmatic, brought a hard drive filled with the data Ethan requested. "This should do it," Greg said, sliding it across the table. "Emails, phone logs, and location history. I even managed to pull deleted files from the cloud." A familiar glance at the hard drive before meeting Greg's eyes. "And Richard?" Greg's lips twitched. "Turns out your wife's boss isn't just careless with his personal affairs. He's been bending corporate policies for years, too. I found records of expense report manipulations and inappropriate uses of company funds." Ethan nodded slowly, the puzzle pieces fitting together in his mind. "Good. Then this won't just be personal. It'll be professional as well." That evening, Ethan took time to reflect on his next move. He opened Amanda's laptop and began crafting anonymous emails, carefully constructing a narrative that would leave no doubt about the affair. The recipients were specific: Claire, Richard's wife, and the HR department at Amanda's company. But he didn't send them yet. Timing was crucial. Ethan also began documenting his own actions. It wasn't enough to expose Amanda and Richard. He needed to protect himself from any fallout. Every text, every email, every instance where Amanda could try to twist the truth into her favor was meticulously recorded. One said, oriented around these two big minority figures. The irony wasn't lost on him. His skills, honed in IT for years to prevent breaches and safeguard data, were now being used to dismantle the life he'd built. He had always believed in protecting the integrity of systems, but now he was dismantling one: his marriage, because it had been irreparably corrupted. The morning of Amanda's next business trip, Ethan watched as she packed a small suitcase. She was humming softly, seemingly unaware of his scrutiny. It struck him how ordinary she seemed, how unbothered by the cracks in their marriage she had created. "Are you sure you don't want me to drop you off?" Ethan asked, feigning concern. Amanda shook her head, her smile automatic. "No need. I've got a cab coming." "You're sweet, though." He watched her leave, her carefree demeanor cutting like a knife. As soon as she was out the door, Ethan set the next phase of his plan into motion. His plan was to rape her. He contacted Claire first, using an anonymous email account. The message included screenshots of texts, hotel reservations, and the damning evidence Greg had uncovered about Richard's financial misdeeds. Ethan didn't expect a reply, but within hours, Claire called him directly. "Who are you?" Her voice was shaky but tinged with fury. "Someone who thought you deserved the truth," Ethan replied. "Check your inbox. The evidence is all there." Claire's silence spoke volumes before she hung up. Ethan sat back, his emotions swirling. He wasn't finished yet, but the groundwork was laid. Richard's world was about to collapse, and Amanda's would follow suit. The real question lingered in his mind. What would Amanda do when she realized he wasn't the oblivious husband she believed him to be? Ethan woke to the faint hum of his phone vibrating on the bedside table. The email notification confirmed what he had anticipated. Claire had forwarded his evidence to Richard's company's HR department. While it wasn't yet public knowledge, the gears of corporate justice had begun turning. Ethan imagined the fallout would be swift. Richard's position as a high-ranking executive made his affair with Amanda a clear breach of policy. Not to mention his fraudulent financial activities, but Ethan wasn't about to leave anything to chance. He had spent the night preparing a series of encrypted drives containing all the evidence Greg had helped him collect. Copies would go to Claire, Richard's board of directors, and Amanda's company's CEO, leaving no room for damage control. Despite his careful planning, Ethan felt an ache deep in his chest as he sipped his morning coffee alone. Memories of Amanda, how they used to laugh, dream, and share everything, played like a cruel reel in his mind. It was a struggle to reconcile the woman he had married with the person who had so callously betrayed him. Still, he reminded himself, this wasn't just about Amanda anymore. Her affair with Richard wasn't some fleeting indiscretion. It was emblematic of a larger betrayal of trust. Ethan had supported her career, sacrificing his own ambitions to give her the freedom to excel. And this was how she repaid him? Evan walked out. Later that afternoon, Ethan received a text from Greg. "You're going to want to see this." Attached was a link to a private server. Ethan clicked it and was greeted by surveillance footage of Amanda and Richard at a restaurant the previous evening. They sat in a secluded booth, leaning close, their faces alight with intimacy. The audio feed Greg had managed to capture wasn't crystal clear, but the words they exchanged were unmistakable. "I can't keep sneaking around forever, Richard," Amanda murmured. "Ethan's not stupid. I think he's starting to suspect something." Richard smirked, swirling his glass of wine. "Let me handle that. Ethan's harmless. He's too meek to do anything drastic. Besides, we've got the leverage. The house, the accounts, your connections, it's all set." Amanda hesitated, lowering her voice further. "What if Claire finds out?" "She won't," Richard replied confidently. "And if she does, we'll spin it. She's always been emotionally unstable. People will take my side. Just stick to the plan." Ethan felt a white-hot surge of anger. They weren't just careless. They were brazen, arrogant enough to believe they could outmaneuver him. The mention of leverage and connection struck a nerve. Had Amanda been preparing for more than just an affair? Was she planning to dismantle their shared life entirely? And then there was the pain he felt when he realized this secret place was his memory site to strike him to the very core, something he hadn't felt for years. Ethan decided to test her resolve that evening. When Amanda returned from her meeting, Ethan greeted her warmly, setting the stage for a quiet dinner together. She seemed cautious at first, as though suspecting he might press her about her whereabouts. Instead, Ethan talked about work, the minutiae of his day, and even complimented her outfit. Amanda relaxed, pouring herself a glass of wine, slipping back into the rhythm of their domestic routine. "Diaz, Bersi, you've been so busy lately," Ethan remarked casually, cutting into his steak. "I feel like we barely see each other anymore." Amanda hesitated, then smiled. "I know. Things have just been crazy at the office. Richard's been relentless about deadlines." Ethan nodded, his expression neutral. "Must be tough. I hope he appreciates how much you're doing for him." As she faltered but quickly masked it with a laugh. "Of course he does. I wouldn't work so hard if he didn't." The lie sat between them, unspoken but glaring. Ethan suppressed his frustration, knowing the moment to confront her wasn't now. Tonight was about watching her closely, observing her movements, her tells. The next morning, Ethan decided it was time to bring Claire into the fold more directly. He called her using a burner phone, ensuring the conversation couldn't be traced back to him. Claire's voice was clipped, filled with quiet fury. He told Claire, "Hey, I've been speaking with my lawyer," she said without preamble. "Richard has no idea what's coming. But thank you for telling me the truth. I can't imagine how hard this must be for you." She's a foresight. "It's not easy," Ethan admitted, his voice low. "But this isn't just about me. Richard's arrogance has hurt more than just our families. People like him need to face the consequences." Claire sighed. "What about Amanda? Are you planning to tell her you know?" "Not yet," Ethan replied. "She's too comfortable, too confident that she's in control. I want her to see how quickly that illusion can crumble." Before they hung up, Claire offered one last piece of advice. "Be careful, Ethan. Revenge can be satisfying, but it can also consume you. Don't lose yourself in this. Ethan sat in silence after the call, Claire's words echoing in his mind. He wasn't sure if he was taking revenge or seeking justice. Maybe both. The final preparations began that evening. Ethan composed the email that would expose everything to Amanda's company's leadership, attaching files detailing Richard's misuse of funds and Amanda's complicity. He also included screenshots of their incriminating conversations. Uh, the email wasn't meant to be kind. It was a scalpel designed to cut away the rot. Ethan also prepared his own legal documents, ensuring his financial assets were protected. He had no doubt that Amanda, once cornered, might try to retaliate by weaponizing the divorce. The last piece of the puzzle was a face-to-face meeting with Amanda. He didn't plan to scream or cry. He had moved beyond that. Instead, he would present her with the evidence and watch as her carefully constructed world shattered. For now, Ethan allowed himself a small smile. The trap was set. All that remained was to watch it spring. The morning was unusually quiet. Ethan sat at the kitchen table, his laptop open but untouched. The hard drive containing the damning evidence lay next to his coffee mug, its presence a weighty reminder of the storm he was about to unleash. He glanced at his phone. Amanda's meeting with Richard was scheduled for the afternoon. She had claimed it was a work trip, but Ethan knew better. The hours leading up to the confrontation were filled with a tense, almost unbearable anticipation. Ethan rehearsed what he wanted to say, careful to focus on the facts and avoid emotional outbursts. He wasn't just confronting Amanda. He was taking control of the narrative, ensuring there was no room for manipulation or denial. When Amanda returned home later that evening, Ethan was waiting for her in the living room. The usual warmth of the space felt cold under the weight of what was about to transpire. Amanda paused in the doorway, her cheerful smile faltering slightly when she saw him. "Ethan, you're home early," she said, attempting casualness. "I thought it was time we talked," Ethan replied, gesturing to the couch. Amanda hesitated but sat down. "Is everything okay?" she asked. Ethan studied her carefully. "That's what I want to ask you. Are things okay, Amanda?" Her brow furrowed and confusion flashing across her face. "What do you mean? Of course things are okay." Ethan leaned forward, his voice steady. "I know about you and Richard." The room fell silent. For a moment, Amanda didn't move, her expression frozen in shock. Then she laughed nervously, a sound that rang hollow. "Oh, Ethan, what are you talking about? Richard's my boss, that's all." "Don't insult my intelligence," Ethan said sharply, cutting her off. He reached for the hard drive on the table, holding it up. "This has everything. Texts, emails, receipts, even surveillance footage. I've known for weeks. Amanda," her face drained of color. "You've been spying on me?" "I had to," Ethan snapped, his composure slipping momentarily. "Do you think I wanted to? Do you think I enjoyed discovering that the woman I've spent 10 years building a life with has been lying to me?" Amanda's hands trembled as she clasped them together. "No, you can't," Ethan interrupted, his voice colder now. "There's nothing to explain. You chose this. You chose him." For the first time, Amanda's mask cracked. Tears welled in her eyes as she leaned forward. "Ethan, I didn't mean for it to happen. I was overwhelmed and he was there for me in ways you weren't." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Don't you dare try to shift the blame onto me. I gave you everything. My support, my time, my trust, and you threw it away for someone who sees you as nothing more than a convenience." Amanda's tears fell freely now, but Ethan felt no sympathy. He had spent too many nights agonizing over her betrayal to be moved by her remorse. "I want you to hear what's going to happen next," Ethan said, his tone firm. "I've sent all the evidence to Richard's wife, Claire. She knows everything and she's taking action. Your company's HR department has also been informed. They'll be reviewing your relationship with Richard under the lens of professional misconduct. Amanda's eyes widened in panic. Ethan, please. I'm not finished, he said sharply. I've also spoken with my lawyer. The divorce papers are ready, and I've ensured that you won't get a dime more than you're entitled to. The house, the savings, we built those together, and I won't let you use them to start a new life with him. Funny take. Amanda's expression turned from panic to desperation. Ethan, I made a mistake, but we can fix this. Please, don't throw everything away over one mistake. One mistake? Ethan echoed, his voice rising. This wasn't a mistake, Amanda. It was a choice. Every lie, every night you spent with him, every time you looked me in the eye and pretended nothing was wrong, that wasn't a mistake. That was calculated. Amanda buried her face in her hands, her sobs filling the room. Ethan stood, unable to sit any longer. I loved you, Amanda, he said, his voice softening slightly. I loved the life we built together, but you destroyed that, and now you have to face the consequences. He turned to leave, but paused at the doorway. I'll be moving out tomorrow. My lawyer will be in touch. Amanda looked up, her tear-streaked face filled with regret. Ethan, I'm sorry. Please, don't go. Yes, sure, Manila said. But Ethan didn't reply. He walked out of the room, his resolve unshaken. In the quiet of his car, Ethan allowed himself a moment to process what had just happened. The confrontation had been cathartic, but it hadn't brought the closure he thought it would. There was no satisfaction in watching Amanda crumble, no victory in knowing Richard's life would soon unravel as well. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming his life, free from lies and betrayal. As he started the engine and drove away, Ethan felt the faintest flicker of hope. The path ahead would be difficult, but it was his to walk. The days following Ethan's confrontation with Amanda were a haze of paperwork, moving boxes, and uncomfortable silences. Ethan had taken a few personal days to finalize his arrangements, securing a small apartment, filing for divorce, and preparing to sever the last ties to the life he thought he had built with Amanda. The apartment was modest but functional, a temporary space where Ethan could regain his footing. It felt strange to wake up in a place without Amanda's presence, without the familiar rhythms of their home. But the absence, he realized, was also freeing. The heavy weight of distrust and suspicion had lifted, replaced by a tentative sense of peace. The fallout from the confrontation was swift. Ethan heard through Claire that Richard had been fired, almost immediately after HR reviewed the evidence. His misconduct, coupled with the financial irregularities Ethan had uncovered, left the company with no choice. Claire had filed for divorce as well, and the whispers of scandal spread quickly through their social circles. Richard, once a man of power and influence, was now a pariah. And the whispers of scandal spread quickly through their social circles. Then the text message that would help. Amanda hadn't been spared either. Her termination came within days of Richard's, her employer citing a violation of company policy. Ethan imagined the humiliation she must have felt, the realization that her choices had led to this moment. He didn't relish her downfall, but felt a grim satisfaction in knowing that justice had been served. Despite the chaos, Ethan couldn't ignore the hollow ache in his chest. He hadn't just lost a wife. He had lost the future he had envisioned with her. Every corner of their shared home, now empty of his belongings, carried echoes of a life he could no longer claim. One evening, Greg visited Ethan at his new apartment. The two friends shared beers on Ethan's small balcony, the city lights sprawling before them. How are you holding up? Greg asked, his tone more concerned than casual. Ethan shrugged, taking a sip of his drink. Better than I thought I'd be. Worse than I hoped I'd be. Greg nodded. That's normal. You've been through hell, Ethan, but you did what you needed to do. Ethan stared into the distance, his gray eyes reflecting the faint glimmer of streetlights. I don't feel like I've won anything, Greg. I feel like I've just lost less. But Greg leaned back in his chair, letting the silence settle before speaking again. That's part of it. You can't rebuild until you clear the rubble, and you've done that. Now it's about what you build next. Next time. Ethan considered his words, the metaphor striking a chord. Rebuilding wasn't something he had thought much about yet. He had been so focused on exposing the truth and dismantling Amanda's deceit that he hadn't planned for what came after. A week later, Ethan received an unexpected email from Claire. I wanted to thank you again for everything. If you hadn't sent me the evidence, I might have stayed in the dark for years. I'm sorry for what you've gone through, but I hope you find some peace in knowing you've helped me find mine. Um, if you ever need someone to talk to, I'm here. Ethan stared at the screen, her words resonating deeply. He had acted out of necessity, but knowing his actions had empowered someone else brought him a measure of solace. He replied simply, "Thank you. I wish you the best as well." In the months that followed, Ethan began to rediscover himself. He threw himself into work, taking on projects that challenged him and reignited his passion for IT. He joined a local running club, something Amanda had always dismissed as a waste of time, and found surprising camaraderie among strangers. He also reconnected with old friends, people he had drifted from during his marriage. Conversations over coffee or beers reminded him of who he was before Amanda, before the betrayal. But healing wasn't linear. There were nights when the loneliness crept in, when memories of Amanda's smile or laughter resurfaced unbidden. He allowed himself to feel the sadness, but refused to let it consume him. One evening, Ethan sat at his desk, going through old photographs he had packed away hastily. Picture of him and Amanda on their honeymoon caught his eye. They looked so happy, so full of hope. Ethan stared at the photo for a long time before slipping it into an envelope. He labeled it "Past" and placed it in a box he didn't plan to open again anytime soon. It was time to move forward. Months later, on a crisp autumn morning, Ethan stood at the starting line of a charity 10K run. As the starting gun fired and the crowd surged forward, he felt a sense of exhilaration he hadn't experienced in years. And the A7 Disrespectless was ready to fly again, training for a 10K. Ultimately, personal best event. Each step felt like a declaration, a resilience, a freedom, of new beginnings. Ethan wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew one thing with certainty. He was done living in the shadow of betrayal. It was time to build something new, brick by unbreakable brick.